Coming up on this episode, Golden State lose their third straight game as Luka Doncic runs riot, leaving Warrior fans frustrated at Steve Kerr. But before we get started, I just want to wish everyone a happy new year. Hope you have a great 2024. Thank you for the ongoing support to this podcast and my YouTube channel. It is really greatly appreciated. Without further ado, let's get into it. Yes, welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. It's about to go 7 a.m. on January 1. So as I said in the intro, Happy New Year to everyone. I'm sure for those of you in America, you're still in preparation for what will probably be a big night for many entering the new year. For me, I was in bed and asleep by 10:30. That's just what I do on New Year's Eve. I love going out and having a beer as much as anyone, but not for me on New Year's. This is probably 5 or 6 years in a row now where I haven't even made it to midnight. It's just another day for me. I do like to go out and celebrate different stuff and whatever, but New Year's Eve just doesn't really do it for me. That's, you can call me lame, whatever you want. I'm not holding it against other people who want to go out and party. That is more than fine, but just not for me. And it does allow me to wake up at this point and talk about what was another disappointing Warrior performance yesterday, going down 122 to the Dallas Mavericks at Chase Center on Saturday night. A game where the Warriors were down by 8 after the first quarter. And, they got within 3 in the second quarter. But aside from that, the Mavericks just responded to every Warrior run that they tried to produce over the final 3 quarters. They never took the lead, the Warriors, in the final 3 periods. They got within, 6 in the fourth quarter. They tried hard again, but unfortunately, defensively, they were just never able to get any stops. And for the Mavericks, they shot over 55% from the floor, 40% from three-point range. Everything was going in for them, which just meant that any Warrior run was met with immediate resistance, basically, and the Mavericks just creating a little buffer again for themselves. The biggest storyline out of this, for me, was really the defense on Luka Doncic, who, as he does, MVP candidate, had 39 points, 8 rebounds, 10 assists, controlled the game from the outset. I think we had double-digit scoring. I think he might have had 14 in the first quarter, made 3 of his 5 threes. And meanwhile, in contrast, Steph had 2 points in the first quarter on 1 of 7 shooting. Dallas opened up an 8-point lead, and you could say that's the difference in the game. And I tweeted out after the first quarter that the game ultimately is about your star players, and Luka was a superstar level player last night for the Mavericks. And Steph battled his way to 25 points, but it was a hard 25 points. And unfortunately, the Warriors just weren't able to make things difficult on Luka in a way that Dallas were able to for Steph. So, a lot of people, including myself, were left frustrated with Steve Kerr and the lack of flexibility or lack of ability to change anything on Luka. Essentially, he was just allowing easy switches from the get-go. The Warriors obviously started Trace Jackson-Davis. We'll get into that in a second, but Luka was able to exploit Trace repeatedly. Kevon Looney comes in, same thing happens. And really, you had very few possessions where your ideal point of attack defender, say a Jonathan Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins, Brandon Bajemski, whoever it may be, there was very few possessions where they were actually guarding Luka for 24 seconds of the shot clock, let's say. And, Gary Payton II was back yesterday, came in for, I think, nearly 10 minutes, guarded Luka well on a couple of occasions, including a block in the second quarter. But to ask him to go out and try and change the game in that manner was always going to be a tough task, given he hasn't played for a few weeks. So it was just really disappointing, the fact that the easy switches were allowed to happen. And honestly, I thought Trace's defense on Luka for the majority was actually not too bad. Like, he kept him in front of him, and most of Luka's buckets were just step back jumpers. They didn't foul him. He only got to the line for 3 free throws, which is unusual for Luka. So I just thought that the defense was okay in those one-on-one matchups, but after a while, you've just got to see every step back jump shot going in and think, can we just get the ball out of this guy's hands? And to be fair, they did a little bit in the second half, but by that point, Luka had got going. By that point, Dallas as an offense had got going. And it wasn't just him, to be fair. And I tell you what, as an Australian watching this game, it was a weird watch, because I had to watch, as an Australian Golden State fan, I had to watch Dante Exum and Josh Green absolutely tear up the Warriors. And against 28 other teams. I really support those guys. I really wish them well. I want them to absolutely dominate. But not necessarily against the Warriors, and that's what happened. Dante Exum, his career resurgence. I love seeing it because I've probably got old tweets about it. I was always going to die on the hill that Dante Exum shouldn't have been out of the NBA. Now, yes, he has rapidly improved over the last couple of years, particularly with his outside jump shot. I think he's, what they say on the broadcast yesterday, he's over 44% or something this season. He's taking advantage of all the space that Luka provides. But he's a guy that is really kind of the do-it-all guy for the Mavericks now. In a way that maybe like Brandon Pajemski is for the Warriors, I suppose. Like, can shoot from the outside. Obviously came into the league, number 5 overall pick, as kind of this 6'6" athletic point guard. So he's got the ball handling and the playmaking skills. Still, he can get downhill and finish at the rim. So he's got more to his game than just being an outside shooting threat, which was really his biggest issue heading back to the NBA, and he's been able to fix that. And as I said, taking advantage of the spacing that Luka provides, I suppose, in the open shots that he can create, which, you know, is fantastic. And I love seeing Dante succeed because, as I said, I don't think he should have been out of the league in general. Maybe it's what he needed to get back to this point, but I always thought he had the talent if he just was in the right situation and he could get his body right. So it's fantastic to see, but unfortunately he tore up the Warriors yesterday, and Josh Green as well had 18 points. He was fantastic. So it wasn't just Luka, but I thought the way that the Warriors guarded Luka was, there's just no malleability about it. There was no change up until the second half, where eventually they started throwing two bodies at him and they got the ball out of his hands. But again, you know, the other Mavericks, they were able to make plays off of that, and it was too late for the Warriors. Dallas found a groove from early in the game. And, you know, 132 points, you're just not going to win games when the opposition puts up that kind of score. So you just see the difference in the contrast between how Luka was able to control the offense and how Steph just struggled. And this is the third consecutive game now. I tweeted out yesterday, can someone tell Steph it's still not Christmas Day yet? We're now into the new year, because this is 3 games in a row. Albeit this one was a little better. He had 25 points, but the last 2 games he had 13 against the Miami Heat. And then what did he have on Christmas? 18 or something like that. So really, really, you know, disappointing 3 games here from Steph. And I mean, you look at the shooting numbers: 9 of 25 shooting, 6 of 15 from 3-point range. So he was actually making his threes a bit. That I think he was 5 of 10 at one stage. Made one of his last 5. Few of those were kind of at the end as he was trying to chuck shots to pull off a miraculous victory kind of thing. But then you look at, you know, inside the arc. So he finishes 3 of 10 from inside the arc. I don't know what's going on with some of these missed layups that have tended to be maybe a little bit more like more than just a 1-game thing. Like, I think it's more of a bit of a season-long thing where he just seems to be missing some of these layups that he'd otherwise generally make. And again, there were a few yesterday. Now I know Derek Lively, the second, is, you know, fantastic young rim protector, shot blocker, who can erase some of these shots. But I thought the majority of them are layups that Steph should be making. And, you know, tight games where, as I said, the Warriors got back within 6 in the final few minutes. You know, I thought this is, you know, a game where if he makes some of those layups and the Warriors make some more shots, regardless of how bad their defense was, they're probably still in this game. So Steph was, you know, it was just hard for him, and that's the issue. It's just everything feels difficult at the moment, which, you know, unfortunately, ideally, you want to have, you know, Steph-less 30 points on 15 shots, or what is 15, 16 shots, and leading the Warriors to victory. And everything feels difficult right now, but not as difficult as having to watch Klay Thompson yesterday, which is a real shame because he had 6 20-plus point outings in a row, and he's backed that up with 3 stinkers. So he's had 25 points in total in his last 3 games, and this was by far his worst game of the season. And we've talked a lot about the struggles of Klay Thompson so far this season. Before that, those 6 20-point outings in a row, obviously. 3 points on 1 of 11 shooting. Didn't close for the second game this season, which is going to be interesting to see how he responds to that, because obviously the first time around in Phoenix, he responds with a 30-point game in LA, and that's the first of his 6 20-plus point games. Can he respond in a similar manner? There's been a lot of, I suppose, which I don't know if you'd call them hot takes, but a lot of takes, I suppose, about Klay over the past 24 hours or so, not even 24 hours since the game ended. I think we need to calm the bus a little bit, because I don't want to necessarily overreact to one horrifically bad game when literally 2 or 3 games ago now he was in season best form and was playing really, really well. But in saying that, while trying not to overreact, it's hard not to overreact to a 3-point 1 of 11 shooting game. Like, that's how bad it was, and that's the issue with Klay now, is that it's either good, like really good, or it's really, really bad, and there's no like in between. There's no like middling Klay games. There was a few early in the season, but now it's like feast or famine with him, and unfortunately, like, if he's not scoring the ball, and what is he doing for you? And like, starter games is so important for him, because if he can build his confidence up, then he's fine. Then he makes the right plays. His shot selection is fine. His decision making is good. Even over those 6 20-point games, like he had multiple games with multiple assists kind of thing, 5-6 assists. He was really making the right play, particularly off pick and rolls and whatever else. And unfortunately, that just kind of goes by the wayside as soon as the shot starts missing and doesn't start falling. He kind of goes back to forcing things, and the shot selection becomes a little bit more iffy. I suppose the issue for Klay and the issue for the Warriors is, so they start Chris Paul yesterday for Brandon Podziemski, which was an interesting, strange move, especially when Steve said after the game that he wanted to boost defense. Well, he obviously did that by bringing in Trace Jackson-Davis for Kevon Looney. I just think he doesn't want to start 2 rookies. He doesn't want to start 2 rookies and Jonathan Kuminga, regardless of how well they're playing. I just don't think he wants to do that. And he can say whatever he wants. That's what I think the facts are. I think he does not want to start 2 rookies, regardless of the fact they're not really playing like rookies, and one of them's 23 years old and had 4 years at college, and Jonathan Kuminga in the starting line. Now, maybe when Draymond comes back, maybe you bring Draymond in for JK, and then he may be willing to start Pods and Jackson Davis. But in the meantime, I don't think he wants to do that. And in saying that, like, CP3 plays well. That was probably CP3's, it was definitely his best scoring game this season. He made a season-high 6 threes and had a season-high 24 points. His season-high before that was 18. First time getting over 20. I mean, he made a few late to kind of keep Golden State alive to an extent. So CP3 played pretty well. Pods, despite going back to the bench, played pretty well. I think like 13 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, made a couple of threes. So I think that the issue for Klay here is the fact that both those guys played well, and ultimately you're only going to have an absolute max of 2 of that trio in the starting lineup at one point. So right now, do you question, well, Chris Paul played really well, Pods played really well, Klay had an absolute shocker. Do we have to start questioning his spot in the starting lineup? Because obviously we've now moved past the point where Klay's an automatic closer. He's just not. We've seen that in Phoenix back on December 12, and we see that again yesterday against the Mavericks, and rightfully so. Like, he shouldn't have been closing that game, and he didn't. It was the right decision, but he's obviously going to feel frustrated by it. He's going to have to move back to that point where he acknowledges that my play in that game was not warranting of closing, regardless of how many points in the bank I've got from everything I've done for the franchise over the last 10, 11, 12 years. So it's just going to be interesting to see, because I think we've reached another critical juncture with Klay to see how he responds. Now, I don't think Steve's going to do anything in regards to taking Klay out of the starting lineup, but I know I've seen fans on social media, I suppose, clamoring for that a little bit. Again, I'm always going to go down to the fact that, and even in the fourth quarter yesterday, you saw the gravity that Klay pulls in terms of, regardless of what he's shooting in that game, he was 1 of 11. Teams are still going to guard him out on the perimeter, and I think that's super important in a team that's lacking a bit of perimeter spacing, and especially around Steph. I think it's vitally important. Now, do you want your $43 million player to be nothing but gravity? Not really, no. Like, you need more than this. To have 3 points on 1 of 11 shooting when you're getting paid $43.2 million is a disaster. An absolute disaster. There's literally no other way to put it. But I do think that asking him to be taken out of the starting lineup as fans, I do think that's a bit of an overreaction. based on his history, based on how he plays with Steph, and based on the fact that we're 3 games removed from a really good Klay stretch. Now, hopefully, as I said at the start, he can respond to his second late game benching in a similar manner as he did his first. Just the starting lineup in general. So, again, I don't know. I would have liked to have seen. I get the CP3 thing from a Trace standpoint. So I actually the first possession of the game was a CP3 lob to Trace, wasn't it? I think or the first Warrior offensive possession. So I think those two work really well together. And maybe Steve thought, okay, if I'm going to start Trace, I need to maximize what he can do offensively by having Chris out there. I do just wonder, the ball is out of Steph's hands way too much for mine when CP3 is on the floor. And we've seen kind of, these passive stretches from Steph where fans get frustrated that he's not putting up shots, and then, he comes back in the game. As we saw against the Heat, I think he had 1 or 2 shots in the first quarter, comes back after a 7-minute break. So really, first 15, 16 minutes of the game, he's got 2 shots, and then you feel like he's playing catch up a little bit, and he's having to start to force things a little bit. And so I think, fans obviously get frustrated with that, and putting the ball in Chris Paul's hands more. Yes, Steph can play off the ball. We get that. He's averaging a career low in assists practically. But at some point, you've got to give the ball to your best player and say, you are the fulcrum of our offense, and we need to let you get to work and allow everyone else to play off of you, rather than focusing on, let's run a few pick and rolls with CP3 and Jackson Davis, which can work well, no doubt. But it's what defenses probably want you to do rather than getting Steph going. Again, prioritizing getting Klay going, getting JK going with a few post-ups, or when Wiggins comes in, getting him a few opportunities. Prioritizing all these other things over your 2-time MVP, superstar, best franchise player in history. At some point, things have got to turn around here, and you've got to look at that and say, okay, no, we're going to run things through you. And I think that's going to be difficult to do if Chris Paul's starting, because Chris Paul is going to want to monopolize the ball and have the ball in his hands a majority of the time. And yes, there are moments where he will make things easier for Steph, and I think we've seen that this season. But there's also times where he's going to prevent him from getting going in a manner that the Warriors need to ultimately win these games. And I think that's important. So, Draymond's going to be back here probably in the next 5 or 6 games, whatever it is. Again, last episode I spoke about what I think should happen with him. I don't think he should come back. I guess the Looney Jackson Davis spot is the big talking point from this one. Is Looney? This will sound maybe a bit dramatic as well, but is Looney ever going to reclaim that starting spot? Ever? Jackson Davis starts yesterday. I don't think that's a temporary thing. And I said, it's funny now because I said a few episodes ago, I said my prediction would be Jackson Davis would be starting within 12 months, and then by the next episode, that had been cut down to the next 3 months, and now we're cut down to right now, within 2 weeks. And I just don't see... Now, Loon was okay yesterday. He can still play a role off the bench, but I just don't see how he starts at all. And Trace got cooked a bit by Luka yesterday, but you know what? Everyone gets cooked by Luka, especially bigs. And you know what? On another day, Luka probably doesn't make some of those jumpers, and he actually does a really good job on him. And again, I thought that his ability to contain Luka and keep him in front of him and force him into some step back jumpers, and maybe that's why Steve actually didn't change things up, is because he actually saw the kind of shot quality that Luka was getting, and thinking, well, these are actually pretty tough shots. Trace, extended out arm, not giving him too much space. And the unfortunate thing is they're not tough shots for Luka Doncic. And I think Steve just thought, okay, at some point he's going to have to miss some of these. And he just didn't. And, the 8th, 9th step back jumper later. And I'm literally laughing at the TV because, what are we doing here? Why are we not changing things up? But I thought Trace was okay. He probably wasn't as much of a rim protector as you would like, but in saying that, the Mavericks are a high volume 3-point shooting team, so it's not really his game from a defensive standpoint. but I'm just checking here. I think he finished with 17 points, 6 rebounds. Was it? Yeah, 17.6 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal, 8 of 11 shooting. And then I guess he had a low light when he got posterized by Derek Lively late in the second quarter. That play summed up the Warriors for me this season. Just super dumb. Where Trace actually had a free throw on the other end. He misses the free throw, but I don't care. Make or miss free throw. What shouldn't be happening is Chris Paul should not be the one guarding Luka Doncic after basically a stop play. Like, you have a free throw, and then immediately after, Chris Paul is guarding Luka Doncic in the final. I think it was in the final 90 seconds of the first half. Why? Why is that the case? And then, of course, he gets a lob to Derek Love. A second continues Dallas's momentum. I mean, this is supposed to be a veteran team, right? 38-year-old Chris Paul, 35-year-old Steph, nearly 36-year-old Steph Curry, 33-year-old Klay, 33-year-old Dre when he comes back. It's supposed to be a veteran team. And at that point, Steph, Klay, and Chris Paul roll on the floor together. Why are you allowing that? Why is Chris Paul matching up to Luka? Because I'm pretty sure Wiggs was, I think, the fourth guy out there. Like the veteran trio, Jackson Davis and Wiggs. Why, after any free throw, you can make sure that Andrew Wiggins is the guy guarding Luka Doncic, and said it was Chris Paul. Not TJD's fault at all. So I thought he played relatively well. Wasn't his best game, but he still put up 17 points. Like, he's going to be an offensive threat, and it just makes you wonder whether or not Loon is ever going to get back into the starting lineup. And it's going to be it's just impossible. It's especially once Draymond comes back. He's lost his spot now while Draymond's out. I don't know. Like, I just don't see a world in which he can come back. And it's disappointing because I was going to do an episode after the Heat loss, and unfortunately I didn't, because that was the one thing I was going to say is that, okay, we've reached a moment. We've reached a point where Trace needs to be starting for Loon to give them that offensive boost and defensive boost a little bit as well, but mainly offensive, really, and trying to make things easier for Steph. And it should, but I think in doing that, I think Steph needs to be out there with TJD and no Chris Paul to run some pick and rolls between that duo, rather than, CP and Jackson Davis running pick and rolls with Steph as an off-ball threat, because that's not obviously maximizing your superstar player. The last thing I want to put, like, Kuminga, it was funny. He had a horrible game against Miami. He 6 turnovers alone in the second quarter. You could say almost cost Golden State the game, which was really ironic given after the Christmas Day loss, he was talking about, how no one can guard him, and how he's confused, I suppose, about sometimes where he comes out of the ball game and Steve yanks him, which is absolutely fair and right. But to follow that up with the game he did against Miami was really disappointing. I thought he played okay yesterday. People were complaining about some of his defense on Luka. I don't think he barely guarded Luka, because every time it was high pick and roll and he was switching off of him. So there were people complaining about JK's defense. I don't know, how many shots was he actually contesting Luka in that game? I don't think it was many. I'd have to go back and check the stats. Maybe I need to rewatch the game, but I don't think it was many, because it was just, okay, let's guard Luka as he brings the ball up for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, and then easy switch for the last 10, 12, 14 seconds of the shot clock. Yeah, just really disappointing, I suppose, schematically from Steve. But JK, I thought he played okay. Again, it's a game where he and TJD kind of exploited the Mavericks on the inside. The Warriors shot horrifically from 3-point range. I think, what did they? Actually, no, they were 39.6% in the end, which is actually pretty good. They were pretty poor in the first half. I think they were like 7 of 22 at one stage or something like that. Helps when CP3 goes 6 of 9, which isn't going to happen very often. But early in the game, they were really, I guess, able to stay in it thanks to some of their interior work with what JK was doing and what TJD was doing as well. The final point here, or I've got the final Warrior point, and then I'll mention something else quickly as well. Moses Moody, DNP, coach's decision. This is another one like Loon where I don't know how he gets back in the rotation. And he probably should. And he probably should be playing. Like, you look at that game yesterday and you think, Klay has 3 points on 1 of 11 shooting. If Klay does not play at all and Moses just has Klay's minutes, then the Warriors are much better off. And this is the issue, is like when you look at all the wings, if you look at the guys who Moody could be playing ahead, and or not ahead of, but eating some of their minutes. So you've got Klay, you've got Wiggs, I suppose, and probably JK. And I suppose GP2 a little bit yesterday as well, although he's his kind of own entity because of what he can do defensively. But if you just say, all right, Wiggs, JK, Klay, those three are guys that Moody could play some of their minutes. I think you'd find a hard time suggesting that Moody should be playing more minutes than any of those guys. So that trio, I think, is the priority. I think those guys obviously have the higher upside with the impact that they can bring. But the issue for the Warriors right now is there can be other nights, and last night would have been one of them. The game against Miami, but the game against Miami literally was because Moses had 10 points in less than 30 minutes. He can be the best of that quartet on any given night. He can be the best of that quartet. And unfortunately, this is one of those things where fans are going to be frustrated. Steve, I actually have some sympathy for him because I think this is incredibly difficult. What he's trying to manage with this rotation, where you have one superstar and then a bunch of guys 2 through 12, maybe 10 players that are all about the same value and can all kind of bring it one night, but then not bring it the next, and you've got to try and work out who's got what on any given night and who's going to work well in different lineups and it is tough. It is tough, and one of the reasons why everyone, the guys at The Athletic and me and everyone else is kind of clamoring for a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 trade isn't just to get more top end talent in and have hopefully a second star next to Steph. But it's just to make things easier for Steve, a bit more clarity about the rotation and be like, okay, we've got 10 guys now, not 12. We've got 10. Or maybe we've only got 9. Maybe come the playoffs, we've only got 8. But sometimes that's better. And I know you like to have depth, and it helps that the Warriors do have that, and they've probably had some games here where the depth has been a positive, and they're missing some players. The fact they went on a 5-game winning streak without Draymond or GP2 is credited largely, I suppose, to the depth they've got on this roster. But on most nights, it just makes things incredibly difficult because you've got someone like Moses who, what exactly has he done wrong to be out of the rotation? What's he done wrong? He has 10 points in 13 minutes against Miami. He makes a couple of big defensive plays, blocks Tyler Hero twice, and he's the MP next game. Which I legitimately understand it from Steve's perspective. I do, because someone has to miss out. They do. Moses is too good to be a DNP, though. He is. And this is the issue with the roster. Not enough top-end talent and too much depth, which is weird. Too much depth is a weird thing to say. You should feel like you never have enough depth, but on a nightly basis, you just don't know what you're going to get from everyone, basically. And so trying to mix and match, trying to pick and choose is an incredibly difficult job. And I think he won't acknowledge it now, but I think Steve might look back at this, and his future is up in the air, right? Because he's out of contract at the end of this season. This might be the final year of Steve Kerr as the coach of the Golden State Warriors. And I think he might look back at this and think this is probably the toughest coaching year that he's had, just because of the depth of the roster and trying to work out different rotations where nothing is literally he would be up late at night scratching his head wondering what he can do here in trying to work out what his best lineup actually is and getting things to click. And we thought, something might have arisen over that 5-game winning streak. Well, now it's fallen by the wayside. You lost 3 straight games. You're back to 15 and 17 and 2 games below 500. And you're in a hole again. You're in a big hole. So I'd be surprised if Moody's on the team come February 8 trade deadline. After that, I'd be surprised if he's on the team. And I think the Warriors, part of that is I think they need to do the best thing for his career. And the best thing for his career is put him in an organization that's going to be able to give him 20, 25 minutes, because the Warriors just cannot do that right now. And I understand why, and I understand what Steve's doing to an extent, but it doesn't change the fact that he shouldn't be getting DMPs. And it's just a tough situation. You're, between a rock and a hard place right now if you're Steve Kerr. I legitimately do have some sympathy for that. Before we finish up, that's the kind of final things on the Warriors. We had the OG Anunoby trade to the Knicks yesterday, which kind of takes, I suppose, one of the potential options for Golden State out the window. They obviously had a link to OG going back to last season's deadline, where I think the reports were, well, I remember Shams, he reported that the Warriors were interested in OG Anunoby going down to the last 2 hours before the trade deadline. I'm pretty sure at that point Masai Ujiri wanted Jonathan Kuminga a part of it, and I don't think Bob Myers at that point was willing to give that up. So the price demand from Toronto was a little high. He goes to the Knicks now for RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and a second-round pick, and then Toronto get Precious Achiuwa and Malachi Flynn as well. Initially, I looked at it, I thought, geez, good deal for the Raptors, because I'm not particularly sure. Is OG a guaranteed better player than RJ? I don't know. It depends what you want, and that's why I looked at it initially and thought, okay, great deal for Toronto, but then I looked at it from Knicks side, I thought, okay, I can see why they did this, because I think OG is a much, much better fit next to Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle than RJ Barrett is, because of what he can bring you defensively, because he's not going to say, give me the ball for 10 possessions a half and let me cook. When you got those two guys who ideally you want the ball in their hand, you want those two guys sharing the ball handling and shot creating duties, and then you want guys off ball threats who do also have the capacity, I suppose, to put the ball on the floor, attack closeouts a little bit, like OG does, and then he's one of the best perimeter wing defenders in the league. So I think it's a good fit for New York, and I can clearly see why they did it and why they might have overpaid slightly, I suppose, to make it happen. And obviously, Emmanuel Quickley, his free agency stuff sounds like he wanted more than what the Knicks were willing to pay him come free agency. So you get something for him now. It makes sense. So I just thought a pretty good deal for both teams. I can see why both teams did it. But it may accelerate, I suppose, the timing for Pascal Siakam here, who was reported yesterday. Many league executives feel like he's going to be the next player to fall here for Toronto. And of course, the Warriors have been linked with him as well in the past. I'm going to kind of hold off my thoughts, but the only thing I will say is that I'm not sure who the Warriors small forward is if they trade for Pascal Siakam, because you're narrowing yourself into having to have Pascal and Draymond as your 4 and 5, and then who's your 3? Is Wiggins part of the trade? Probably, and so it can't be him. Kuminga's shooting yesterday, just on a different topic. That might have been the worst I've seen Jonathan Kuminga ever shoot the ball. And I think he was like 1 of 5 or 1 of 4 or something. But if you just go back and look at the shots themselves, the ball barely got above the rim. Like, they were so flat. They were so flat. And as a guy who I go down to my local court and I try and shoot, and I'm always so flat on my jumpers, I cannot get any arc whatsoever. I was watching, I was thinking, he's got no chance of going in. And he actually did make one, I think, in the fourth quarter. But that looked bad, his shooting yesterday. So you cannot, at this point, you cannot play him at the 3. As nice of a defensive kind of versatility and strength that would give you at the 3, 4, and the 5. But again, you're going to be asking to play Draymond. Like, are you going to Siakam shooting 25% from 3-point range this season? Are you going to be asking him to play at the 3 with Draymond and Jackson Davis? I mean, that's big. That's a big lineup, which would be very different to what the Warriors have rolled out previously, especially when you've got a 6'6" Klay Thompson at the 2, assuming in that lineup. So I don't know. That's the issue for me with Siakam, is I don't know who plays at the 3. It's fine, I suppose, if you trade Chris Paul and whatever else and keep Wiggins, and maybe you just say, okay, Wiggins is our 3. Do you say that Pods comes back in, or CP3 still in there, so it's CP3, Steph, Clay, or Steph, Klay pods. Like, I don't know. And that's the issue right now is the Warriors have these kind of lineup roster issues that maybe even a big trade for Pascal Siakam won't fix. And therefore, is it worth doing, especially when he can be a free agent at the end of the season? But I'm going to finish it up there because any kind of trade speculation talk, I want to leave next episode, hoping to get a guest on. Got something in the works there, which might be out in the next 48 hours or so, to go through, I suppose, the best scenarios for the Warriors leading up to the trade deadline. Because, as I said, after this Anunoby deal, things for Siakam maybe accelerating a little bit and other players around the league, which could be a good thing for Golden State because if they just keep doing this until the February 8 trade deadline, well, by that point, even if they do trade for anyone, it might be too late to really do anything in the Western Conference. So it might actually be a good thing that things get accelerated a bit here and maybe something happens in the next 2-3 weeks rather than the deadline, which was pretty surprising. I think that Anunoby trade took everyone by surprise yesterday because I think most of these big deals usually happen on trade deadline on the day or max a week or two out maybe. And now for it to happen 5-6 weeks out is surprising. But again, we might see something here with the Warriors in the next couple of weeks to try and salvage their season. Other than that, again, wishing everyone a happy new year. Thank you for your ongoing support. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. Please follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Looking forward to a big year, whether or not the Warriors go up or they continue to fall on their face. Doesn't matter. I'll be here to live through it all. So looking forward to providing much more content for you and interacting with you guys on YouTube. And of course, you can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on Twitter. Have a good new year, guys.